Welcome to How to Become a Production SQL Database Administrator. My name is Raphael. So in the previous video, we installed Windows Operating System 2012 using a virtual machine. Now what I'm going to do to that virtual machine and the operating system is what's called promoting it to a Windows domain controller. And let's see how we do that. So let's go back to our virtual environment and expand this. At this point, this particular operating system is just what's called a standalone server. So in order to promote this, we have to go to your server manager. So left click here and open the server manager window. What we're doing now is promoting this particular server so it'll become a domain, just like Microsoft.com or Google.com. Those are domains. Now we're going to create a domain and add other servers within this domain so this particular operating system can control and manage all the other servers and workstations within a domain. So the way to do that is left click on add roles and features. That's fine. Just go next. Now, I'm not going to go through the networking part individually. I'm just going to accept the defaults. But this is the process of adding a what's called Active Directory also. Now, it's highly unlikely that the DBA will do this. Most likely, you'll go to an existing environment where already have a domain. But again, it's always helpful to know the background of what a domain system is now is created. So go next. It's going to select the appropriate server if there's more than one. Ours is just only one, so go next. And what you want to do now here is right here, Active Directory Domain Services. Check that box and add the appropriate features and go next. We want to apply this also, so select that and go next and finish and go install. Now this again will take a few minutes. It's going to ask you to go through this process of making this a domain controller. And when it's finished, we'll have to promote this. At this time, it's just adding these features of domain server. The next tab that will come up is to promote it, and we'll do that in a second. So this will take a few minutes. So again, I'm going to pause this video at this point, and when this finishes, we'll come back to it. So I'll see you in a second. And we're back, and as you can see, the features have been installed. So once the features have been installed, what you need to do is hover over this and promote this to what's called a domain controller. So left click that, and we'll start with the selection. So just look at the add a domain controller to an existing domain. We don't have one, so we have to select a new forest. And the root of the domain, now this is just like Microsoft.com, so we're going to call it SQL.com, and go next. Now you can call this domain anything you want, but for our purposes, we'll just call it SQL, and go next. And it's going to take a few seconds here, but we're going to have to add a password here. So you can add the same password that you did for the administrator, but if you want to use a different one, that's fine. This will just take a couple of seconds here while this is being configured here. So as soon as that is the case, we have to install, add the password. Now, it's not important, well, not important, but it's not that critical at this point to understand the entire process of this. Is more of a network-related task that you will do, but again, it always is advantageous to know what's going on in the background in creating a domain controller. And as you can see, we're going to be installing what are called Active Directories. And this is, in a nutshell, where we control the security of our entire domain, which is SQL in this case. So I'm going to add the same password. And go next. It's going to ask about delegation of DNS. Just accept the default and go next. You can have in a production environment, a domain naming space is a separate server, but for our purposes, we're going to let this particular operating system act as the DNS also. So just go next. And you'll notice once we promote this, It's ready to go. We're just going to go next. Now here at this point is if we have any issues in creating the domain controller, we have to resolve them and then rerun this process again. So if we see anything here, we have to do them. Any cautions, it's fine. But any red flags that come up, we must fix them at this point. And this is where previously, when we were not accommodating the complex password for the administrator, we got an issue here. And what I did is went back to the administrator and changed the password to a complex password. And then I didn't get this. I'm hoping now that this will bypass that since we did it. And as you can see now, all requisites are passed. So that's fine. We get some cautions, but that's okay. So now we can install and start the process of installation of domain controllers. And again, now this is going to take a few minutes. So again, I'm going to pause this video. When this comes back, we'll start looking at the process again. So I'm going to go back to here and pause it, and we'll see you in a second. And we're back. And as you can see, when the domain controller restarts, it becomes, this is the interface. The operating system rebooted and it restarted. And now you'll notice here that we have a prefix of SQL/administrator because now it's part of a SQL domain. So we're going to add the password and start. So now this particular operating system that was a standalone is now actually a domain controller. So this is the primary server that would act as a security for all the other servers that were to come in, and it'll manage all the other servers and workstations regarding the securities and other features, which we're not going to go into, but you'll get the idea. Here you'll notice here now, if I'm clicking on it, I'm going to click on the Windows, and you'll go to Administrator Tools here. You'll notice here I have these actual icons that I never had. One is the Active Directory of users. If I click on this, this is where I control. You can see now I've got a domain called SQL, and I have users, and I have computers, and so on. So this is where we manage the securities of users within the domain. So this is an important concept to understand now. And I'll show you that in a second. So this is now a domain controller. One thing we need to do is look at the network capabilities and add that what's called a static IP address. And that's what I'll do to the next thing. So the other thing I want you to do is if you go to the folder here, right click my computer, properties. If you wanted to know information about the Windows domain server, you can see that now the domain is called sql.com, and then the fully qualified name is the server name plus sql.com. And if you wanted to change anything, this is where we can do it. So now this is a domain controller. So what does that mean in a nutshell? In a nutshell, this is what it means. Let me illustrate this quickly for you. I don't want to get into too much analysis of what a domain is, but I think this one will give you an indication of what I'm talking about. So let's make a new one first. And actually, let's just click this off. So I can use this. And let me click that off also. So I'm going to take this and add this here. Imagine you have let me click this. Imagine you have a computer. This computer is a standalone server. Now imagine, I'm going to take another one. Imagine this server is a standalone computer. Now what happens is when you have a domain, we take this particular computer and we promote it as we did. And this becomes now the domain controller. This becomes a standalone servers. And that's great. So far so good. But what happens in a domain is, let me create this. Let me fill this with something different. There we go. So this now becomes an SQL domain, and it's going to get a little complicated, but that's fine. This is an SQL domain. We'll just call it SQL. So this particular server, which we've promoted to a domain controller, controls all these servers within this circle. And this circle is called a domain. So anytime you add another computer, so let's say another computer comes in, or a workstation that's part of this SQL domain, and let's create another one. So this is another workstation or another server. Anytime it comes within this SQL domain controlled by this is now controlling all these servers and their permissions. So in a nutshell, that's the easiest way I can do it. I don't want to get into it. I have got into what are domains, and I've given this a detailed explanation of what an SQL domain is, and I encourage you to look at that when you do. But right now, this is a simplified version of what an SQL domain is. It's simply having a domain with multiple standalone servers, having one particular server promoted to a domain controller, and now this controlling the securities and other features related to these servers within that domain. So I think I'll leave it here. So now we can close that. So that's what a domain is in the simplest sense. So now that we've done that, actually, in the next video, what I'm going to do is actually allocate what's called IP addresses. This is an important concept to understand also, because every computer has what's called an IP address, or a static IP address. Just like a house has an address, each computer in the domain has to have what's called a static IP address, meaning it cannot change. So we're going to give it an IP address, and I'll show you how to do that in the next video. So I think I'll leave that here right now. So we'll continue with the next video, where we'll take this particular domain controller and assign it a static IP address. So I'll see you in the next video. So my name is Rafael, and this is how to become a production SQL database administrator. See you in the next video.